All right, today we answer the age-old question, which is best? Lyrics first or melody first? Let's talk about it. Now, first of all, let me just throw this caveat out there. I am fully aware that it's often more nuanced than this. This isn't a complete dual thing that exists in isolation. So don't come at me with, oh, that's a false dichotomy. I know this isn't the only clear-cut ways of writing your song, because often they blend. There's often a blend of the two. But the reality remains that these are still the two, I would say, core differences between songwriters. And what I find very fascinating about these two camps is that there are incredibly successful artists and songwriters in both of these camps. And so there is no one correct way of doing it. Although I think when you're talking about this on an individual basis, like for myself, for example, I don't think it would be correct for you to suggest or to tell me that lyrics first is best, or it's just as good as writing the melody first or focusing on that first. For me, I think it would be better advice to tell me, for my style, for my personality, to write the melody first, because that is what works better for me, right? And so the main thing, the purpose of this video is to give you an understanding of the advantages and the disadvantages of either approach. Because at the end of the day, there is no perfect approach. There are only trade-offs. And so I'm going to walk you through those trade-offs. That way you have a better understanding, and then you can perhaps use that to your advantage. And then perhaps you can glean some inspiration from the opposite way of how you have been working. Maybe check out the other side for a minute, see if that gives you some new inspiration to write better songs. Or it'll just help you understand and refine what you already do. In any case, I think this video is going to be extremely helpful for you. So let's go ahead and let's jump right in. So first of all, let's just start with the lyrics first approach. Probably the best example or the best advocate that I've found for the lyrics first approach is Billy Steinberg. Now, Billy Steinberg, in case you don't know, was one of LA's top songwriters in the 80s and 90s. I mean, this guy was a menace. He wrote hit songs like a Virgin by Madonna. He wrote So Emotional by Whitney Houston and a bunch of others. So just an absolute beast in the songwriting game. And I once heard an interview with him on the podcast. It was the podcast is called Soda Jerker on Songwriting. And what Steinberg had to say about why he writes lyrics first, I actually found it pretty interesting. So here is his precise quote. I find for me, if someone hands me a melody, it becomes more of a mathematical equation of counting syllables and trying to figure out how to write the lyric to that melody. Then it becomes very conscious, and I can't tap very well into that unconscious stream when I'm trying to solve the mathematical equation of the number of syllables the melody is requiring. So as you can see here, Steinberg's reasoning is actually quite robust. He's got a very strong foundation in his argument for why he writes lyrics first and why he sort of not opposes, but because he understands that a lot of his contemporaries wrote melody first and still do. And so he knew that he was in this particular camp, but I think this is great reasoning by Billy Steinberg. And this is really a core advantage of writing the lyrics first. Or let's actually look at the other side of the coin. It's more so the disadvantage that you see here of writing the melody first is that your songwriting potentially then becomes too much of a mathematical equation. And you might say that's not that much of a problem. Like I've heard great songwriters say that it is basically math at the end of the day. And that's true on a mathematical level. That's true on a scientific level, yeah. It is math at the end of the day. But still, I think this is a great point by Steinberg here about why he writes his lyrics first. Now, another example that I'll give here about an artist that writes her lyrics first is the singer-songwriter Sasha Sloan. So she is a pop singer-songwriter. And so in pop, you might, expect them to pretty much write the melody and the beat and all that stuff first. But that's not the case, or at least not in this case, with Sasha Sloan. So here is a quote that I once heard her say in an interview. So for me, I think it's really funny when people listen to my songs and are like, oh, I love that melody, because I'm never really thinking about melody. I'm only thinking about lyric. it's actually really hard for me to write a melody and then put lyrics to it. And by hard, I mean impossible. I like to tell stories, and for me, it's easier to do that when I have the concept beforehand rather than the other way around. So once again, you see where these people are coming from. And especially as myself, I'll out myself here. I'm a melody first writer. Sometimes it's a hybrid, but like to my core, I definitely focus on the melody first. But these songwriters that I'm just talking about here, that I'm sharing with you, they're putting forward these really solid perspectives on why lyric writing, or writing the lyrics first rather, is a not only valid approach, but even a desirable one as well. So now that we've spent the last couple minutes walking through the cases to be made for writing lyrics first, let's now talk about the opposite side of the spectrum, melody first. Because the case for melody first writing is really, really strong as well. And this is why I love this discussion so much, is because there are just superstars in both camps, right? So it makes for a really interesting dichotomy here. So when it comes to famous artists and songwriters who tend to write their melodies first, I've heard Keith Urban talk about it, that he loves writing the melody and focusing in on the groove and all of that before he really delves into what exactly he wants the lyric to be. And then another example is Matty Healy, the frontman of 1975. Many of you have probably heard me talk about his approach before. And the reason that I think probably share that is just an ego thing. It's probably an ego thing because I was listening to an interview with him on the Tape Notes podcast, I think with John Kennedy, a couple years back. And when Matty Healy was talking about his approach to writing, it just so happened to be basically my approach. And he validated my approach. So here's Matty Healy's sort of way of coming up with a lyric and melody and what the order looks like. So they might have like a demo with his producer and they're like working on some stuff. And they'll have a groove. They might even have the chord progression locked in. And then what Matty Healy does is he'll start recording and he'll just start to play around. But he's focusing on the melody. He's not focusing as much on the lyric at first. And instead, he focuses on the melody and tries to lock that in. And sort of in an underground type of way, he sings gibberish naturally as he's trying to come up with the melody, since he's vocalizing. And then he pays attention to the words that end up coming out of his mouth. So he actually, and this was done in a humor-like way when he was on the podcast, and he was like, I just let the lyrics write themselves, man. But anyway, his point basically was he focuses in on the melody. He really dials that in. And then in the meantime, as he's singing gibberish, he lets the lyrics kind of present themselves over time. And I think that's such a beautiful way to write music, is you let the melody, the groove, and all of these other components in a beautiful, creative way, those actually inform what the lyrics should be. Now, this might take longer for you to find the lyrics, right? And even there's so there's this artist, Andrew Bell. You may have heard me talk about him before as well. One of my favorite artists, one of my favorite songwriters. And that's for a very good reason, by the way. Just a quick backstory on Andrew Bell. So I had been a fan of his music for a few years. But then this is probably like 2015, 2016. Up to that point, I had been a musician for a while already, and I had learned the ins and outs of some production and mixing stuff. I was by no means great at that time, but I had somewhat of a gist of how to make music. But I didn't trust myself, and I didn't even believe in myself when it came to writing lyrics. But then I started to listen to Andrew Bell and his lyric writing. And his lyric writing was so inspiring to me that it got me off my butt. And I was like, I'm going to learn how to write better lyrics. And so Andrew Bell truly was that inspiration for me. And what's really cool about that is I ended up going to one of his concerts in Philadelphia, which is close to where I used to live in Pennsylvania. And I got a backstage ticket. So I was literally able to tell him that to his face. Anyway, so that was a great moment to be able to share that with one of my heroes. Anyway, so I found it really interesting. So I don't know if this is still on his Spotify bio, but it was at least back in the day, a couple years ago. Here is a snippet of his Spotify bio. Andrew Bell writes songs by feel. The composition first, the melody follows. Only after Bell has an internal reaction to the composition do the lyrics finally come. Finding the right words to express what has always been there, but is only now being fully realized. You might think, well, yeah, that's natural. That's like what a lot of artists do. Well, yeah, but you probably have you listened to Andrew Bell's music? It's super lyricful. He's such a broad and creative mind when it comes to, like, there's not a whole lot of repetition for the most part. He really delves into a lot of different and creative ways of describing the concepts in his songs. And you almost wouldn't expect that of a guy like Andrew Bell, of the type of lyric writer he is. You would almost think that he for sure writes the lyrics first and then weaves them into a melody. But it's actually the opposite. And I find that incredibly fascinating. So there we go. There is sort of the overarching ideas behind and the reasoning behind why melody writing, or writing the melody first, is a wonderful approach. There's nothing wrong with it, just like there's nothing wrong with the lyrics first approach. And now, real quick to wrap this up, let's just dial in and rehash again just a few of the advantages and disadvantages of both. So, lyrics first, and we've probably already talked a little bit about these. So, advantages to lyrics first writing is, one, it's not as much of a mathematical equation. You can feel more free to just dive into the concept, to dive into the story and tell the best story, right? Flip that though, the opposite side of that coin, there's always a shadow. Everything has a shadow. The disadvantage to that is sometimes there's nowhere for that lyric to fit in the context of music, because there will always be inevitably a mathematical component to music. So that's an interesting thing there, right? You have two sides of the same coin. You have both the advantage and the disadvantage built in. And then another thing I would also say about the advantage of writing lyrics first is it allows you to be more free as a writer. You're not, and I know this is connected to what we just talked about, but I'm trying to take this to a little bit of a side street, if you will. If you truly just dive into what you're doing as you're writing the song, it does tend to become much more of a detailed and colorful story that's underneath it. And if you can, this is a big if, but if you can find a way to weave that into the context and the math and the rhythm of music, you'll probably tell the greatest stories when you write the lyrics first. So by all means, especially if your background is in poetry, if you are more of a natural lyricist than you are, say, a musician or a producer, it's very likely that writing the lyrics is the best move for you, or at least the default mode that you should try to operate in. So that's lyrics first, a couple benefits and a drawback or two, wherever we are with the numbers at this point. And then finally, to wrap this up, just to kind of put the finishing touches on this video, the benefits and drawbacks of the melody first approach. We've already talked about it. It kind of helps you get into the mood of the song to where it's almost like the creative, like the muse, as The War of Art, the book, I forget the author's name, but as he would talk about the muse, right? But anyway, it's this creative muse, or it's the concept of this muse that will hit you if you just show up and you start doing the work. And I think that very much applies to the advantage of melody first writing, is because you can focus in on the melody, the music, the vibe, the drums, the groove, all that beautiful stuff. And then you literally let that creativity inform what the lyrics should be. And then, you sing gibberish like Matty Healy. You sing gibberish and you just wait for the lyrics to present themselves. You wait for the magic to show up proactively, right? You're not just laying down in your bed waiting. It's not that type of thing. You're showing up, you're recording the melody, you're messing around, you're singing gibberish, and then you wait for the magic to I love that phrase. I love it so much. You wait for the magic to present itself. You wait for the lyrics to present themselves. It's just a beautiful, beautiful process. And I definitely think it's the greatest advantage of melody writing. It's why it's my default approach, especially as a musician and a producer, right? Because it allows me to make the song, to get the vibe in, and then I let that vibe kind of create its own energy, and from that energy, it feeds into what the lyrics should be. It's almost give me goosebumps just talking about it. I love this stuff. This has been a lot of fun making this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a bunch of good stuff out of it. So this is where I'm gonna wrap this up. I think we talked through all the key points I wanted to get to with regards to lyrics first versus melody first. So let me know in the comments below. Let me know kind of what your thoughts are. Let me know which approach you tend to use. And if there was anything that I talked about in this video that you found interesting, let's have a discussion about that in the comments below. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.